Welcome to the Gratefully Yours Wine Show. I am Jim Campanini, co-host of the show, and I'm with Mike Pigeon, the wine butler,
Good
my
morning,
other
Jim.
co-host. How are you today?
Oh, cold.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's 6
little
degrees
touchy
out
out
this
there.
morning, slippery. But you know what? What better way to warm your heart than talking about wine?
Mm-hmm.
Did I get that right?
A prelude to drinking.
Yeah, all right. Well, we're here with Teddy Painhouse, our producer. Hi, Teddy. How are you today?
Doing great, guys. Good morning.
Very good. We have a special guest today, Master Sommelier, 𝐖𝐞𝐥𝐥𝐩𝐨𝐿. I hope I did that right.
Morning.
Yes, Mark.
Guillaudeu. Yep, you got it.
Guillaudeu. See, I tell you, my wife gives me a two-item shopping list, and I forget it. And she says, how do you remember these things when you talk about wine? But you can't even remember a two-item shopping list. So
I lose my keys relentlessly, but I have tens of thousands of bits of wine information in my head. It's the same thing.
there's Mark, a great guy. We met him. Mike and I went to a fabulous wine seminar in Boston last summer on Sicilian wines, the 𝐍𝐭 DOC. It was fantastic. I was very impressed with Mark, not only because he knows his stuff, but because he was very accessible, answered all our questions, and he was just so great. Great dealing with. And we've been trying to get him, to make an appearance on our show, and he's been very, very busy. So,
Yes, but I'm glad to be here.
yes, Mark, thank you. I have to get rid of a little house cleaning item here. So let me do this first. This InsideLowell podcast is coming to you from the WellPoint Studios. WellPoint, the only health plan offering healthcare benefits exclusively to Massachusetts GIC members. At WellPoint, your whole health is their whole point. WellPoint supports drinking wine in moderation, don't they?
Red wine.
Red wine. Yeah, okay. All right. So, Mark, once again, welcome very much. And as you told us earlier, it's 10 degrees out there in New York City? Where you
Yeah,
are?
10 degrees.
Wow.
I think our high today is 19, so maybe not quite as chilly as Boston, but not far off.
Yeah, yeah. So it'll be a good day to maybe stay inside, read a book. What do you do? Retired, you could do that. And maybe move up happy hour, an hour, Mike? What
An
do you
hour and
think?
a half.
Hour and a half. Good. So, Mark, why don't you give our audience a little background in yourself? I mean, what really intrigued me, you've been involved in the Master Sommelier program for a while. You've also had some competitive events where you've done really well. And also, are you a member of the Court of Sommelier? Are you?
Yeah, I'm a member of the Court of Master Sommelier. That's correct.
Yes, because that is very, very difficult to.
The hardest test on the planet if you
Yes,
measure by pass rate.
yes, unbelievable. And we can get a little talk about this. But tell us a little about your background. I was very intrigued that you studied Tibetan Buddhism in
Yeah,
college.
that's correct.
So take it from there. Give us a little background in you.
Yeah, my kind of original career aim was to do interreligious dialogue between Catholic contemplative monastics and obviously Buddhist monastics. I had a strong enough kind of initial education in theology from home and from my studies in undergrad. I went to a secular college called William Mary. And so I did religious studies instead of theology there, and I did the theology bit on the side and the academic side for school. And so I kind of was like, okay, well, I've got that half of the two sides of the bridge covered, so I need to put in some time and some effort really digging deep into the other half so that I can be a meaningful bridge. So I went to University of Virginia and studied Tibetan Buddhism, in particular the Gelugpa order, which is the order of the Dalai Lama. It was very interesting to me that the two kind of, I would argue, most important founding figures in their respective religions, by which I mean Catholicism rather than necessarily Christianity, and in Tibetan Buddhism and the Gelug school, both were people who had taken material sources, in the case of Thomas Aquinas, in the Catholic side, the so-called pagan fathers, people like Plato and Aristotle, and had found a way to integrate those philosophies into the other philosophies and make them all fit together. 𝐁𝐮 𝐭 did the same thing with other schools of Buddhism within Tibet at the time. They lived within 100 years of each other, and both of them, to do this, chose the exact same method, which was memorization of a vast, vast corpus of texts, and then very, very rigorous and formal debate as a tool of education. And so it interests me because everybody loves to debate. And not a lot of debate yields really healthy dialogue, was what if they both solved the same problem in the same way, were the ground rules the same? Did they both think about reason? Did they think about what it means to be reasonable in the same way? And that was kind of my research project as a foundation for further dialogue, because if you don't agree about what it is to be rational, then there's not a lot else you can really talk about, which has been the way that a lot of interreligious dialogue has gone, is there's been joint practice, and the moment people start talking about what they believe, everything breaks down. And I had attributed that to just not putting in the foundational work of, like, when we talk about what it means to be a reasonable human in this spiritual tradition, do we mean the same thing?
Well, that's interesting, because maybe you could give some seminars on this in Washington, D.C., which I know you were there for a while. But
Yes, indeed.
it's interesting because Lowell has a lot of Cambodian Americans now. After the war, we took in almost 10,000 Cambodians. Now they're in their second, even third generation. But two of my friends, the former mayor of Lowell, 𝐿𝐭 𝐒𝐿𝐴, he was a refugee, survived the Khmer Rouge, came here, and he got to become a U.S. citizen through the Catholic Church. They had yes, they in Thailand they had set up a refugee camp, so they sponsored him. He first went to Minnesota, and then made his way to Lowell. But the other Roddy Mom, he became the first state representative, elected state representative from Cambodia in the United States, and
Oh, wow.
He's still a Buddhist. He's a Buddhist monk,
Sure.
and so it's amazing the difference. One remained a Buddhist, the other one, through his
Sure.
relationship with the Catholic Church. But they've the Cambodian Americans now, some of the anchors of this community. And like I said, they've assimilated well. They've been elected to office, high office, and they've had a big impression with their food. But they love wine, and it was that influence, the French wine. The French went through Vietnam and even some Cambodia. So they're always trying to attack my wine cellar, right, Mike?
No. Well, there's still some wine grown in that part of the world. It's very, very high up in the mountains. A lot of it is grapes that have to be able to tolerate an incredible amount of humidity, but there is, I think it's something like 3,000 hectare or so in Vietnam in particular that's left. So that's about half of a Chablis or so.
Wow.
So it still happens. It's left over from the French period, and you're absolutely right.
So how did this path lead you into the wine industry?
Sure. I kind of decided I wasn't going to go for my PhD. I had been studying logic effectively for a number of years and felt very disconnected. When I was growing up, my parents always had a garden. And so my thought to kind of reconnect with the not mental world was to plant a garden. As things in the garden started to grow, I realized I didn't know how to cook. And so one thing kind of led to another, and that sort of blossomed my interest in food. I started at a all local, all sustainable, originally all organic kind of grocery concept in Washington, D.C., in DuPont Circle. And their opening beverage director snuck out the back door 15 minutes before close on opening day, never to be seen or heard from again. And I was fresh out of grad school, and so I thought, nah, it's fine. I'll do a lit review. I'll put together my piece. I'll read 10 books, and I'll be done, and no one will know that I didn't know anything when I got here, which, of course, now we're, 12 years later, 13 years later, not exactly according to plan, shall we say. But yeah, I just found wine and beverage in general, like not only one from the sort of Buddhist studies perspective, as a perennial invitation to connect and be mindful and be aware. I eventually made my way into fine dining.
Biblical
Yeah.
references to wine.
Oh, of course. But for me, it was more like, mindfulness is such a buzzword in the culture at this point, and that has been in many ways deprived of its original context of everything else that goes around it in the traditions that did that. Although there are, of course, some like mindful kind of cloud of unknowing style things in the Western tradition as well. But for me, like, I learned, I spent so much time growing up debating with people and wrestling with these ideas. And I kind of realized, you alluded to some political things earlier, that at the end of the day, most people don't become convinced by argument because they don't want to be convinced and they don't want to go through the effort to change their beliefs. And so it's like, how can you preach something without words, so to speak? And for me, like, what I love about fine dining in particular, and why I work so extensively in tasting menus, is you cultivate that moment where you put wine and food together, and it is so rapturous that people almost have no choice but to be suddenly, almost forcefully reconnected with their experience, where you're like sip by sip, and they just have that moment, and you can see it on their faces, that kind of smile or chuckle, and they just are completely engaged. And I thought that if I could spend most of my life building that moment at the highest intensity that I could and the highest frequency that I could, then that would be a life well spent. And that, like I said, one thing led to another with wine classes, and now that's how I ended up in the San Francisco Bay. I moved there after DC. I ran a 2 Michelin star Thai Californian restaurant called 𝐿 for about 5 years. And then after that to briefly to 𝐿𝐞𝐥𝐿𝐴, which is a 3 Michelin star Thai restaurant, and then now I'm at Mountain Park, which also kind of brings things a little bit full circle in that it is a plant-based restaurant as well. So that kind of ties into, and not only is it plant-based, but a lot of the early inspiration for Chef Hum to go plant-based came from a restaurant that's now closed in Manhattan called 𝐭 that was a tasting menu centered on Shojin Ryori, which is Japanese Buddhist temple cuisine. So it all kind of came back together again at the end.
So, you talk about, your well, I don't want to classify it as struggles, with dialogue and debate, and sometimes we can get uncivil. One of the favorite mottos I like about wine, in vino veritas. And I used it the other night at my wine tasting dinner at Bosa Coastal Italian. We got into the fourth course. People were having a good time. It was getting a little loud. And I said, hey, you know what in vino veritas means? And in truth, in wine, truth. And I says, yeah, it also means that the more we drink, okay, we start telling our secrets. I said so. Let's calm down, I said, and let's get back to the focus. But it's a great motto, and wine leads to a glass of wine and conversation with friends. It's a calming effect. It's reflective, meditative. What do they say about Amarone? It's one of my favorite wines. I don't drink it often. Yeah, but when I do open up a bottle, it's never by myself. It's always with a group, with Mike and my brother and stuff, and we talk.
It's a powerful wine to contend with on your own.
Yes, yeah.
Best approach with friends, for sure.
Yes. So even like when I did my wine studies, I knew I was going to be retiring. I was the editor of a newspaper. I'd worked in the news industry for 30 years, and I had a passion. I had been to Italy several times, and so I was moved by the experience, the family wine. I wasn't drinking wine it had labels on it. I was just impressed with it. And then I had a passion, and I started going to the Wine Scholar Guild. And you, how did you say that I'm going to embark on, I'd like to be a sommelier, but not just a sommelier, a master sommelier?
In school, I kind of flitted around a couple different ideas about what I was going to be. When I first went to school, I thought I was going to be a doctor, like I thought I was going to be for a very long time. Briefly, I got into linguistics because I found that I had a knack for languages, which has certainly helped in the wine trade. And, fresh out of grad school, I felt like I had rapidly tried on all these different hats of all these different ideas of what I could be, and to kind of prove to myself that I wasn't just going to keep doing that forever and never settle down and actually have a career. I was like, okay, whatever the next one is, you should see that one through. And so when that became wine, I did my early research and was like, okay, well, what does it mean to really see this through? Okay, so there's the Master of Wine program. There's the Master Sommelier program. At the time, there were 4 people living who had done both. There was, at the time, I want to say 313 Masters of Wine and 260 Master Sommeliers. And there was this new program for beer as well, which is called Master Cicerone. At that time, there were 13 Master Cicerones. No Master Cicerones had done the Master of Wine, the Master Somm. And so in my mind, I was like, okay, well, then I'm going to be the first guy to hat trick it. And that will be my working definition of I have achieved mastery in this field, and I've proven to myself that I can stick with a thing until it's done. I got one down. There's now Master of Whiskey as well, so free to go. And along the way, you mentioned kind of competition before. Along the way through that pursuit, I found that there is actually an organization that runs a competition every 3 to 4 years that runs more or less like the Olympics for sommeliers. You have national representatives and everything else, and the crowning title there is Best Sommelier of the World. So as soon as I found out about that, I added that onto the list to at least compete. And that's how, in 22, at this point, to the best of my knowledge, I have more competitive titles than the next person is my partner, because we're very competitive together as well. And that was kind of one thing led to another. I started competing. I found that especially like wine competition was a really good way to focus your studies. And very often when you're in a generalist certification, especially when you're studying something like WSET or the Court of Masters, you feel this compulsion. There's so much material and there's just only 24 hours in the day. So you feel like you have to keep moving. You can't spend a month studying nothing but Burgundy. You've got to study one thing one week and another thing the next week, or maybe even every couple of days you have to rotate topics to keep everything fresh, right? And so these competitions gave me the opportunity to actually spend a month or two really deep diving into a region. And then usually, you win a case of wine or a trip because it's sponsored through someone. And that is ultimately how I ended up connecting with you, is because I won in 23. The Wines of Sicily has a competition every year called the Sicilian Wine Maestro. And so I won that competition. Shortly after that, I passed my Master Sommelier diploma exam, and then they were looking for someone to teach their seminars the next year, and I'd already been on the trip and hung out with the producers and kind of demonstrated what I like to do in terms of teaching. And then that was how I ended up leading that series of seminars last year, and then it's looking like probably again this year too. In May, we're doing a bunch of seminars around the country. We're actually coming to DC. And yeah, one thing led to another, as it usually does, I
Back
guess.
to that competition, it said that in the Best Sommelier USA, no, it says the US. You represented the USA at the Concours Mondial
Yep.
World Championships in Paris. You became the first American to reach the semifinals.
That's correct.
Has anybody done better than that since?
No, that was in 23 in February.
That's
So
amazing.
I won the U.S. title in I guess August, I think, of
Yes,
22.
22, and then February of 23, you competed in
And
that.
then there's 3 kind of regional competitions. There's Americas, North and South, and then there's Europe and Africa, and then there's Asia and Oceania. So I did U.S. and then I got 6th place at Americas, so that really pushed me to try and do better. And then for Worlds, no one else had made it into the semis yet. And ultimately, my ranking last time at Worlds, I got 15th. The previous best was not in the semis. And so then the next edition, I competed again to re-win that title so I could go back to Worlds, because I wasn't going to be happy with only one attempt and 15th place. At least try it twice is kind of my thought. And so I won the U.S. title again this past August as the first person to win it twice. And then now in a little under a month, By this time next month, we'll have the results of the next edition of the Best Sommelier of the Americas competition. And then the next edition of Worlds is in Lisbon at the end of 2026.
Wow, fantastic. Any questions?
And for this organization, when you compete, you will always, the other kind of added twist, and it makes sense when you think about international hospitality, is you have to compete in a non-native language. So for me, I compete in French. So that's all of the theory is in French, the blind tasting is in French, the service is in French, or whatever language you end up choosing, because it's a European organization. And so ultimately, like, you can't have if you're trying to crown a global standard, right? Then that means that when a guest comes into your hotel, your resort, your restaurant, if you're in Paris or Madrid or whatever it might be, having enough fluency that you can handle them in their native language, that you can communicate. Because ultimately, like, we think about hospitality and kindness and gestures. Is there anything more fundamentally welcoming as a foundation that you can do for someone when they come into your restaurant than say hello and take care of them in the language they grew up speaking as a gesture from you to them, right? I think in the US we're sort of spoiled because the whole world at this point speaks English. And when we go abroad very often, I think Americans almost expect that people speak English to them, and they lose sight of how kind fundamentally of a gesture that is. It's somebody going out of their way to do something uncomfortable to make you more comfortable. And that's, yeah, it's a fun pursuit. There are a lot of funny words that I didn't think that I would need in French that I turned out to need.
Yeah.
So here we are.
What's the best part of being I mean, you're in a select company throughout the world. I mean, like you said, there are just only so many across the world, and Master Sommelier. What's the best part of it for you? I mean, i- in your
Yeah, I mean, it is always the people.
Hmm.
You meet, the wine industry is full of so many wonderful people. I met my partner through this. Pretty much all, with one exception from college, pretty much all of my dear friends are in this. You meet, the field is such, especially when people are studying for something like the Master Sommelier, that if it's approached correctly, it's impossible to not be humble in the face of how much there is to know. I used to joke that if I wanted to be right all the time, I would have been a doctor. Is there anything more regularly humbling than blind tasting? And so you get this group of people who are the best combination of humble and hardworking and driven and empathic and kind, and they just, even when I'm now, teaching an introductory exam or a certified exam, and you see people that have the courage to go out there and be measured by someone who they don't know and assessed, it's just, I think it's one of the best things that there is. I really do. And you're going to meet great people, I'm sure, in every field. I just feel like the wine business, at the top tiers, definitely hyper selects for people that are especially kind and passionate and brilliant. And they are far and away the richest reward. I mean, there's so many great wines out there in the world, but time is the greatest resource, and time with great people is, I think, really the defining mark of life well lived.
Yeah, fantastic.
That got very philosophical, but you were warned by degree.
It's true. I mean, when I was, I mean, let's face it. Since I started doing this, I mean, I've been on some great trips, met some great people across the world. My best trips are when you get to those native native vineyards, but they're still run as farms. Portugal, Spain, even in Italy, they respect the land, and they're so welcoming and generous. I mean, I used to like my early trips to Napa Valley, but it's not the same. It's very commercial now, and nothing against the people in Napa, but it's just a different, like the Italians say, piano piano, easy easy. It's serious business what they do, but you know what? They take the time. Hey, we're gonna have some cheese and a little wine. We'll get back to the vineyard later. It's just a life experience, you know.
Absolutely.
And people, the way you meet people, and even if you don't understand the language all the time, you can communicate in so many other different ways. You use your senses, like when you taste wine and everything, and you explore. It's and you could do it at any phase of your life. I started when I was in my 60s learning about wine, and it's just opened up a whole new phase for me. I just love it, you know. So let's talk a little bit about about wine and some trends for 2025. You know, what
Sure.
you might be doing, and what should people who are interested in wine, don't have, you know, they're not going to be a master sommelier, but how could they be better consumers? What are some of the things they could watch, you know, look for in the coming year, and maybe they want to try?
Sure.
Is that too broad a question? Is that-
Maybe. I mean, we'll take a crack at it. The first thing I think would be, in terms of, being potentially a better consumer, is just pay attention as you taste. I think it's so easy to try and enjoy the wine and let it go, but ultimately it's kind of a stop and smell the roses thing. And even training sommeliers, I remind people all the time, like, it's not just, okay, well, this has medium plus acid and medium plus tannin. Like, well, okay, but how does the acid feel? How does the tannin feel? Life and experience are one of those things that the more attention you give to it, the more reward it gives you back. And so I think, I can harp on any number of points. Like, if we could completely banish the word dry from vocabulary of people that enjoy wine, then that would be very helpful, because very often as a sommelier, I'm like, oh, cool, what kind of wine do you like? You're like, oh, I like dry wine. I'm like, you've described 99.7% of wine that's produced by volume worldwide, so we've narrowed out 1/3%. Now we have to keep talking. But yeah, I mean, I would say a little bit of education goes a very, very long way. Um, try. I know that the people that make the wine would hate for me to say this, right? But, like, taste widely. Variety is the spice of life. Try different things. Even if you end up not enjoying a bottle, then at least and keep track as much of what you don't like as what you do. Because ultimately, like, the person you're going to be interacting with, if you're either at a shop or if you're in a restaurant, is somebody who's passionate, who ultimately, like, if they're really good at their job, cares so much more about getting you something that you enjoy than they do about making a sale. That the more information, the more attention that you can bring to your end of the deal, which is the fun part, then the better they're going to be able to take care of you. Does that make sense?
Yes. Well, I tell my people, if they want to learn about wine, just takes 5 minutes. Keep a log book. Every time
Yeah.
you taste something different, write in your book who you shared the wine with, if there was any food, and what was the simple taste, the first impressions you get. And I said, you'd be surprised if you do this regularly over a couple of months. You've got a list. You can go back, see what you liked, what you didn't like. I said, but it's fun. I says you compare with your friends, and that's how I started. But it's amazing, the occasions, the memorable
Mm-hmm.
occasions start adding up, and it's just experiencing with people and everything. So not a lot of people do it, but I know I got my daughter to do it, and
Okay.
a couple of my friends in the neighborhood, and they really enjoy it. They'll send me a little email. Oh, Jim, I tried this wine. It's a new one, and come out of your comfort zone. Try something
No,
different from Chile or Argentina or New Zealand. Try something different. So,
absolutely. I mean, there's just so much out there to discover. There's a special moment for me when I get to try something for the first time, and I don't mean necessarily even like a particular bottle or a particular producer, but there are still styles of wine out there in the world that I have written down on flashcards that are floating around in the back of my head that I've never seen in real life. Just a few months ago, I got to try for the first time 𝐬𝐳𝐸𝐶𝐸 from southern Portugal. That is a unique style of fortified muscat. And there's something, for me anyway, there's something like fun and special about that moment where it's like, oh, I know that this thing exists. Or, to use another example in Portugal, somewhere like Colares, like, there are 30 acres of this style of wine left in the whole world. And when you get to taste that, that's something special. It kind of connects you to maybe how precious and how fleeting things can be. But
Yeah. No. What's on your tasting list for, or what are you drinking right now, Mark? That just when you're done with the. I always say this: when you're done at the end of a day, what do the wine makers drink? And
sure.
I asked that to Giorgio Rivetti one time, the great Barolo boy from the Piedmont, and he said, "Don't tell anybody, but Barbera." He said that at the end of the day, he
Of
says,
course.
"Yeah." But what's some of the wines you? I know you like Rioja. You talked
No,
about Etna Rosso, and
no.
but
Yeah, I
and
mean,
Gruneveltliner, you like that too, right?
I love Grüner Veltliner.
Yeah.
I love Grüner Veltliner. I think it's just so versatile and age worthy, and the value is incredible. Um, Grüner Veltliner today is, I think, in a lot of ways, still in that sweet spot, like Riesling was 10 years ago, like Burgundy was 35 years ago. You talk to people who were working in the 90s and they talk about being able to buy Grand Crus for $30, which, $30 in the 90s is a little bit different than it is today for sure. A lot of the wines that I end up liking are wines I say fundamentally of savor. So especially as I've been kind of preparing for the Best Song of the Americas competition, I've been able to really dig in a little bit more and discover so many styles of wine that I had not tasted in enough depth from South America. So like the Pinot Noirs that are being grown in the northern part of Chile, I think are fantastic. Pais from all around. I also really like if there's one Spanish region that takes maybe a little bit of learning to love, but I think is incredibly rewarding, the Canary Islands, where they grow Pais, but there it's called the San Prieto still, and it's kind of like I always say like Pais is like you imagine. There are so many grapes in life that everybody imagines that when they have children, she's brilliant, I'm beautiful, so our child will be brilliant and beautiful, right? And you know that it almost never works out that way. But you imagine for Pais that something like Syrah and Nebbiolo had a best of all worlds kind of child. It's a little bit smoky, it's a little bit gamey, it's got some powerful tannin, a refreshing acidity, but a light body. And it's also, I think, because it became sort of the everyday sacramental wine, and from there the everyday wine of the people, I think it doesn't get treated with as much respect as it deserves, but there are so many like 100 to 140-year-old vine bottlings that are available where like if I'm getting 50-year-old vines in Burgundy, I'm paying $100 a bottle. And I can get a 125-year-old vine Pais that's gorgeous for $25 a bottle. So I think that's definitely something worth exploring.
Is that available
In turn,
online? Do I have to?
yeah, you should definitely be able to find some. Some of my favorite producers, I mean, Pedro Para is a soil scientist, makes incredible single vineyard Pais. And then also, I love 𝐿𝐥𝐥𝐸 has a bottling called 𝐍𝐮𝐭, which is this, like I said, single parcel. The vines literally trained up trees, just the same way that the Etruscans used to do it, because they got the vine training from Italian immigrants that came over. Like, there's all of this kind of connection and history. I think those ones are fascinating. The really like Pinots from unexpected places have been a great discovery. So like I've had some Canadian Pinot Noir, like I said, the Northern Chilean Pinot Noirs have been really lovely. Some things like Cab Franc that I've been able to try again has been gorgeous.
I was going to
I
ask.
guess the trend there is a lot of wines of lighter body, but that tends to happen to wine professionals. I think is that as time goes on, you like stuff that's a little bit lighter and more refreshing than heavy and rich. You'd rather have 2 or 3 glasses, to your point, than just one.
Yeah. Well, which leads me to the next question about, we've heard a lot about dry January and certain health organization reports coming out and saying that wine is not good for your health. The U.S. Surgeon General wants to
Yeah.
put a label on bottles. And yet there's so much controversy over it because none of these reports tell the entire story. And
No.
I mean, is the wine industry under attack? Is this what it is? I always thought the cannabis industry was doing this to try to, put a wedge in there, drive people into to now that marijuana is legalized. But I don't want to condemn them. I know a lot of hardworking people in that industry. But I said, where did this all come from? You know?
Yeah, I mean, the origin of it is tough. I've read probably a lot of the same things that you have. There do seem to be some individuals that seem to have a agenda that may not stack up with what the science has been for the last 30 to 40 years. The fundamental thing with this issue that I like to talk about is, people want an easy answer. Attention spans are shorter than they've ever been because of, algorithms that prioritize you scrolling through the next thing as fast as possible so that you can get to the fifth thing so it can show you an ad. At the end of the day, like, even when you get to the original language, right, there's no safe level of consumption that came from the World Health Organization, which, number one, if we rewind and we go back, they did that only by discarding thousands of studies that have shown a positive effect over a 35-year period based on some criteria that seem a little bit strange. And of course, as we know, if you find a reason to discard all data that contradicts your point of view, then you're going to find your point of view confirmed. This is why we use thousands of studies instead of 5 or 6 in order to prove our points when we're actually looking for the heart of the matter. But that line of no safe level, at the end of the day, a Surgeon General wants to say that alcohol may cause cancer. That is certainly the case. At high levels of consumption, alcohol certainly does cause certain cancers. Most of the recent report from the Surgeon General, and I forget, NASEM, I think was the acronym, but they point out that moderate consumption has something like a 10 and 16% increase. There's 10 and 22% increase in 2 different kinds of cancer, and a 16% decline in overall mortality. Okay, so on the whole, that means that you are less likely to die if you imbibe moderately than if you don't imbibe at all. But getting back to that fundamental idea of no safe level, right, or there is some risk. Okay, I remind people, what there's absolutely no safe level of doing? Stepping outside and being in the sunshine. Sunshine and UV causes skin cancer. It does. We know it. It's well documented. The difference is that there's no sunlight in the street to attack. You know what else has a zero risk? Staying inside your house forever, right? Like, the thing that I think people lose sight of is we're all adults, and adult life is actually, all life actually, but adult life especially is calculated risk, right? I live in New York City. I could step out onto the street and somebody could come out of nowhere if I wasn't careful enough. There's risk involved in that. The question is how much risk, right? Like, we know that there is, to use the same phrasing, we know that there is no safe level of automobile travel. There's no level of that where there's a 0% risk of anything going wrong, whether it's because of defects in manufacturing or whether it's because of traffic or whatever it might be. But no one out there is saying that because there is no 0% risk level of automobile travel, that therefore no one should travel by automobile. And so it seems a very strange kind of connection. Now, the last part on that, too, that I point out to people is that ultimately the argument runs, alcohol consumption in its breakdown in the body creates a compound called acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde is a known carcinogen. So therefore, alcohol consumption causes cancer risk via acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde is a compound that's produced as fruit ripens. The problem is that the levels of acetaldehyde that are produced in your body in the breakdown of alcohol are on average lower than what you find in a ripe banana. But no one is saying don't eat bananas. No one is saying don't eat apples. All of these other components have higher natural levels of acetaldehyde, and yet they are spared this treatment. And so when you're like, okay, well, if acetaldehyde is the problem, then we should be talking about the various sources of acetaldehyde and actually be doing something about the problem, except we have to recognize that when we're looking at that, the acetaldehyde is clearly not the problem. The acetaldehyde is an excuse. Otherwise, we would be applying it equally, right? So that's kind of where I fall on all that. Is like, okay, if this is the problem, then let's apply it consistently, but we're not. So then that's obviously not the problem. It's just a justification.
Well, it was interesting that at this a wine tasting dinner I did last Thursday night on the wines from Sardinia, and it was some of the people already knew when I mentioned the next wine we're going to be tasting is 𝐿𝐴𝐾. They said, "Oh, that's the good wine." I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, "Oh, it's got antioxidants and and it fights cancer,"
Yep.
which was true, you know. And I says, "Yes." I said. Then we brought up a little about the health issue, but I says, "Yeah, you know, moderation is always important, and the way you live
No.
your life." And I says, "But you can enjoy it." And I said, "Did you know that Sardinia has the highest age longevity rate for all of Italy, all 20 provinces, and they're in the top three in Europe?" I said, "Most people live to be 86 years old, but if you make it to 86, you got a 2% chance to make it to 100. So I said,
Yep.
that's something to think about, but it's the whole terroir, the environment. It's not only
Yep.
what they drink, it's how they live their life, what they eat. I said, so
Lots of walking, lots of tight social
those are
contacts.
the other
It's
factors we should consider besides just saying, "Oh, that bottle of wine in front of you is going to put you in the ground a lot sooner than you think." So I
and
said,
the problem is, when you look at things like mortality and you're trying to look at someone's life, number one, a lot of these studies are based on self-reporting, which is the best tool that we have, and it's real life. There's any number of confounding factors. Um, and so, like, the part of the issue to me as well is that we know that alcohol provides this protective effect. The shocking thing about the news for the last year and a half has been that all of a sudden it seemed like, despite the effect being documented dozens upon dozens to hundreds to thousands of times, all of a sudden we decided that we were just going to ignore all of that evidence and say, no, 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 it actually doesn't exist. We've seen it consistently. It's like I walked outside my apartment and somebody was just like, no, Empire State never was a thing, and I was looking right at it, right? Um, Part of it is that every time that we've tried to figure out exactly what it is in wine that is health protective, we can't find it, right? We pretty much at this point believe that the number one thing that causes the cardiovascular benefits of wine, the reason why wine helps to fight heart disease, is because it is literally straight up the ethanol, because it thins the blood, it helps keep things moving, it helps clean the system up. If you have just a little bit every now and again, or just a little bit every day, in the 90s, people talked about resveratrol in red wine because that was the thing that separated red wine from white. And there's that difference in red wine consumption versus white wine consumption on morbidity. Well, when they finally did a study to get resveratrol to a truly cancer protective dose, it was the equivalent of something like 8,000 glasses worth of resveratrol. So we know that it's not actually the resveratrol, or maybe it's of the 1,000 different compounds in a glass of red wine. It's got to be some interaction of all of those things. And real life is messy, and it's hard for us to tease apart those threads. And because we can't hold something up and say, here's this thing in red wine that resolutely I can give it to you in a pill and it'll mitigate cancer risk, then we say, oh, therefore there's nothing. Because we can't isolate only one factor. We have this reductive kind of scientific mindset of, if I can't prove it, it doesn't exist. And we forget how long it took us to prove basic things like gravity. Like, we're still demonstrating parts of the theory of relativity empirically, but we've accepted it as fact for a very long time. We want to have that kind of simplistic mindset, and that's just not realistic, puns intended.
gee, you know, Mark, with your logic, I think you could do a great job for the wine industry. I'm sure I'm sure.
I spread the word where I can,
Yes,
sir.
yes, yes. Very, very good. Well, we're almost out of time here, and I just want to know: are you going to be in the Boston area at all this summer, or anything coming up with any
Um,
seminars? Or
I think we may have some Sicilian wine programming coming. I will probably, at some point, although I don't know when, before the end of the year, I will probably be up there to teach some programming with Court Master Sommeliers. I will say, if you guys do want to see me in action, the finals of the Best Sommelier of the Americas competition are always live streamed. So you can find that on YouTube. I will send you a link to the channel where that will be posted, so you can share that with your viewership after.
and
And
when will that
otherwise,
take place, Mark? When will that take
the
place?
finals will be on February 20th. So 29 days, I think that is now.
Good.
Um, So that'll be a chance to see the competition. And also, if anybody listening has not seen a sommelier competition, they can be kind of fun and a fun little twist on what you think of for wine service. But yeah, I will definitely be up in the Boston areas at some point before the end of the year to teach for the court, and then seminars wise, I need to check the calendar, but I will look and I will send you a list.
Oh, thank you very much. Well,
Of course.
I'd like to stay in touch, and hopefully after.
course.
I know this is your busy, very busy season. I want to thank you
Yeah.
for taking time out because I tell you, the study. I know you put in about 20 hours. You work and then you study. It's just a fascinating world, but it's also time consuming yeah, I remember watching on YouTube a documentary, Sommeliers, a couple of years ago. They made us watch it. I forgot the name of the documentary. It took it showed 4 or 5 of them as they.
No,
Yeah, I forget.
it's called Som.
Som, yes.
So
If
it
you
came out in
haven't seen it,
2012, won some awards for documentary.
Yes.
I think it's a very, very well done documentary.
very intense. And
Yeah.
if you want to really know what the world is like for these magnificent people who dedicate their life to learning and educating people about wine, it's just a great show. Som, yes,
Absolutely.
you should watch it. So, but hopefully,
It was on Netflix for a long time. I don't know if it
Yes,
still
it was
is,
on
but
Netflix.
it's always a great watch.
yeah, but hopefully we'll be watching you, okay, take the gold crown pretty
Indeed.
soon. So I want to thank you once again for coming on.
Of course.
And send me those links, and we'll stay in touch. But you've really you were impressive back when we first met you,
Yeah.
and you're impressive still.
Like Jim has
Thank
said,
you.
wine has always been Jim's passion. But listening to you, it's your being, and with all that knowledge you have in your mind, you speak from the soul, and that is
Thank
you.
you.
And I really, really enjoyed listening to you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
No, it's
It
very
was a
good.
delight to be here.
And just we didn't open up these bottles today, but I'm sure you've tried these. This is the 𝐖𝐢𝐧𝐭 Babetta d'Asti, Michel Chialo. You know,
Yeah.
and so these are this made the Wine Spectator Top 100 list for 2024. I think if it was 71 or 79 on the list. Only $17.99 for our people.
I had that once upon a time when I was in San Francisco and running a steakhouse. I had that wine on the list.
Yeah,
Absolutely. It's a
very
great wine.
good. And this is the one that I found, a gem at Costco recently. It's from San Pedro. There's the vintner. It's called Sideral. It's from Chile at the 2021, but it's a blend. Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah, Carmenere, Petit Verdot, and Cabernet Franc. So Mike
sounds
and I will
delightful.
try this sometime, and we'll report back to you maybe next.
Fire up a little asado.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, so we'll try it. But Mark, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and good
course.
luck, and we will be following you.
A pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. And to all our viewers out there, this is my last show in studio for at least a month, but I'll be zooming in from Florida with my brother John, who's a winemaker. We've had him on the show before about his special Zinfandel that he makes, and hopefully Mike will be sitting in studio with Teddy Panos, and we'll talk about wine, and maybe I'll find some gems down in the Sunshine State. What do you think, Mike?
Oh, you'll find a gem or
Yeah,
two.
okay. So until we meet again, may the wine be with you.